So last time when we met, we talked thematically about slaves in the United States, right? We talked about them long-term. We looked at them from colonial days all the way up to the antebellum period. And we kind of ended our discussion on colonization and the American Anti-Slavery Society, right? We talked about the death of Elijah Lovejoy in Alton in 1837. And today we're going to pick up this discussion about the road to disunion, why the Civil War came about, and what are some of the contributing factors, right? The Civil War happened for one reason only, slavery. Everything that we're going to talk about today ties in to contributing this bifurcation within the nation about anti-slavery and pro-slavery sentiments, okay? So if you hear things, well, it was more about states' rights, or it was more about economic issues, yeah, states' rights about slavery, economic issues about slavery, it all ties in. And as we talked about last time, Western expansion is a big player in this. Now, to pick up with the American Anti-Slavery Society is a bunch of publications were coming out in the antebellum period that really helped enlighten people in the North about what was happening in the slave society, right? Most Northerners at this time had grown up without slavery in their homes or in their communities, but they were obviously aware that it existed in the South. So the information they were getting from maybe their white Southern counterparts was that it was benign, it was, we were being paternal for them and all that. But it was when the runaways that we talked about during that rebellion aspect, the revolt, how they resisted the slavery, that the story started to come about. And a lot of those slave narratives that were being published by the American Anti-Slavery Society are very informative, but they were individuals who were slaves that couldn't read or write, that had to kind of lecture to someone, and a white person wrote it down. And when they wrote it down, like any other editor, they kind of exaggerated some things or emphasized something that shouldn't have been emphasized, what have you. David Walker comes about, and he is significantly different. He is a free black man at this time, and in 1829 he writes this, an appeal to the colored citizens of the world. So this is a black man writing about slave experiences during the time frame. So this is coming straight from the horse's mouth at this period. So he is seen as someone that is in the know about exactly what is happening. And in his appeal, he talks about forming black unity amongst the slaves, right? He wants the slaves to get together, and he openly pushes for the slaves to revolt against their masters, their overseers. And this is verbatim in his book, okay? And he writes this book very weirdly for the black population. And when I say very weirdly, because 1829, 1830, when this is coming out, these laws have already been established that we talked about in South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, that slaves aren't allowed to read or write. But yet he's writing for them. So he knows that there's no bookstores that are going to be carrying this in the South, but bookstores in the North carry it. It becomes popular amongst abolitionist readers, and it starts making its way into the South through, obviously, for Southern standards, illegal means, right? There's a network of information that flows back and forth from north to south. It's very clandestine, of course, and certain individuals read the book, share the book with people in the South. So it doesn't get across to everyone, but it does get across to individuals, and they catch on to this aspect of black unity. Of course, that doesn't mean that they automatically rise up and start overthrowing their masters or anything like that. They cannot. But it gives them a sense of hope, right? Because he's talking about freedom in the North, what has occurred in other places, and instilling a little hope into a slave is a huge thing during this time frame. It was considered very radical for its time frame. Southern society was absolutely scared of this, right? We've already talked about different revolts and rebellions that occurred in the South, And here's an individual who is black that's inciting this, right? So the more of this information that trickles down in the South, Southerners are afraid, oh my God, my slaves are going to read this and decide to overthrow me, to murder me in my bed, to take care of my kids, all that kind of stuff. This is not a good thing. So within the South, David Walker is despised, right? Some Southerners put a price on his head, dead or alive. They want this issue resolved. And it starts, Southern governments start monitoring the mails so that this cannot get down into the South. There are free blacks in the South that have the ability to get this information, to read it and share it within their communities, right? There's a lot of slave owners own enough slaves. Sometimes they'll send a slave into town to, go on an errand of some sort, and that slave could run into a free black, and the free black could pass off information over time, or at churches, right? We told you last time that there's whites monitoring church meetings on Sundays to make sure that information like this was not disseminated. So publications were starting to inform the broader society of the realities of slavery. And Walker's was a significant one, but obviously the most significant one was Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. A white woman wrote this, and that's important because obviously at this time frame there are still major gender roles. So here it is, Stowe is reaching beyond what her gender role dictates she should be doing. She's writing about an issue that in the North she really doesn't have firsthand experience of. She wrote this in 1852, and it is one of those books I feel that each American should read, right? There's a list of some books about American society that are important. This is absolutely one of them. Her skill in writing, she was educated along with her brothers and stuff like that. She knows what she's talking about, right? Because she's done some research on this. She's talked to some former slaves. She's a member of these anti-slavery societies, and she has excellent prose. So she does it in a narrative style. It is a fiction book, but it is definitely a conglomeration of different stories coming together. And it's a very heartfelt book, right? She knows how to tap into readership. She reads a lot. She knows what readers like, right? Readers are into that sentimental stuff, right? The breaking up of families, the trials and tribulations of slavery with families being broken up, being sent to the Deep South, losing children, all that kind of stuff. And it becomes immensely popular in the United States. Next to the Bible, it is probably the most popular book of the 19th century. It got all over the world, and people from the Queen of England and people in the South, people in the North, people all over Europe read this book. And it had a massive effect on people's opinions of slavery, right? Because once again in the North, we knew slavery was happening in the South, but we didn't really know about it because it was so distant from American society at that time. Here, she's putting it right in your lap. And she's putting it in terms your basic reader can understand. You can put yourself in the place of those individuals, right? The relationships with family, relationships with your children, all that kind of stuff. And some people have said that, this was a major cause of the war. It wasn't, but it's a contributing factor, right? Everything that we're going to talk about today are contributing factors, right? You keep throwing different fuel on the fire, and it's going to blow up sometime, and this is exactly what Harriet Beecher Stowe did.